Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder with someone you'd trust your life with, fighting side by side through fire and fear, sharing rations in the mud, laughing through exhaustion just to feel human again. Now picture that same brother in arms, that same friend, turning his weapon toward you without a single heartbeat of hesitation. This isn't just another story of war. This is the moment when loyalty died in an instant. This is Order 66, the most precise, devastating act of betrayal in all of galactic history. You've heard the stories whispered in shadowed corners, the day the Jedi fell, the day the clones turned. But what few ever realize is just how far back the strings were pulled, how deeply the seeds were buried. A conspiracy so vast it began long before the first shot of the Clone Wars, hidden in the very blueprint of life itself, woven into the DNA of every single clone trooper born on Kamino. When people speak of Order 66, they talk about the numbers, thousands of Jedi gone within hours, millions of clones acting in eerie, perfect unison across an entire galaxy. But those numbers are just smoke hiding something far more personal. The truth of it is heartbreak. Brothers forced to kill brothers, trust shattered in the space between breaths. A plan decades in the making, one man's dark vision pulling the strings of fate until even the most powerful guardians of peace were brought to their knees. This isn't only about Emperor Palpatine's brilliance or the fall of a republic. It's about the clone who watched in horror as his own hands carried out his Jedi general's death. It's about the Padawan who saw the soldiers she'd trained with that very morning turn their rifles on her master. It's about the galaxy waking up to the cruel truth that sometimes the ones standing beside you are the ones destined to destroy you. Deep beneath Kamino's silver waves, in the sterile glow of its endless white laboratories, something monstrous was being born. Not in vaults, not in data files, but inside the minds of millions of unborn soldiers. Clone Protocol 66, the silent weapon, the invisible order, not just another contingency, but the key to a deception so perfect it could only be designed by the Sith themselves. Imagine millions of identical men, each carrying the same hidden command inside their skulls, each one a living weapon waiting for a signal they would never see coming. The Kaminoan scientists, famous across the galaxy for their flawless precision, worked with cold, surgical grace to implant these biochips during the earliest stages of embryonic growth. But behind their long-necked elegance lurked something else. An unseen hand. The influence of the Sith. Every gene, every nerve, every microscopic detail had been orchestrated under their direction. The biochip itself was a masterpiece of deception, disguised as a harmless behavioral control device. To prevent aggression, they said. To ensure loyalty. The perfect lie. In truth, it was a trap built with the precision of a scalpel. The procedure was delicate beyond imagination. Each tiny embryo, suspended in its growth chamber, received a chip no larger than a grain of sand, fused directly into its developing neural network. Over time, it became indistinguishable from natural brain tissue, an invisible parasite hidden inside every soldier's mind. From birth, it was part of them. They would never know otherwise. And the Jedi, with all their wisdom, never saw it coming. How could they? They were at war, leading these very soldiers into the heart of every battle, trusting them with their lives again and again. The clones were not just soldiers, they were companions, brothers, trusted friends. They shared stories, victories, losses. They saved each other's lives countless times. And all the while, the mechanism of their betrayal slept quietly in their skulls. The Kaminoans' role was absolute. Their shining facilities, their reputation for flawless creation, all of it became the perfect mask for something unspeakable. Every inch of the cloning process was open to Republic scrutiny, every file reviewed, every test logged, except one. The biochip, labeled innocently in medical reports as a behavioral safeguard, a necessary adjustment to temper the aggression in Jango Fett's DNA. Nothing more. Nothing suspicious. The brilliance of it lay in its simplicity. Hide the weapon inside the soldier. Hide the executioner inside the loyal friend. Every single clone carried this program. No exceptions. No oversights. No weak links. The Kaminoans ensured that the chip bonded perfectly with each clone's unique brain pattern, turning the army into something no one could question. A force of absolute loyalty and absolute control. Even the Jedi never asked why an army appeared so perfectly tailored to their needs. They never asked why soldiers designed to serve peacekeepers required behavioral control devices. They never suspected that their greatest allies were engineered from the very start to become their assassins. The secrecy surrounding the protocol was airtight. Every Kaminoan scientist was compartmentalized, knowing only a sliver of the truth. The medical droids had just enough programming to maintain the chip's health, but not enough to understand what it truly was. The Republic's databases were flooded with genetic reports, medical charts, endless streams of data that buried the truth beneath layers of routine information. From the moment each clone drew his first breath in those white Kaminoan halls, the trap was already set. From Commander Cody to the newest cadet, every man carried the same silent command sleeping inside their mind. Millions of soldiers, each one a sleeper agent who didn't even know it. The perfect army. The perfect loyalty. The perfect betrayal. And in the end, it wasn't rage or rebellion that brought the Jedi down. It was obedience. The biochip made sure that when the time came, not even the deepest sense of loyalty or the strongest bond of brotherhood could stand against its control. Years of shared battles, laughter, blood, and sacrifice, all of it would vanish in an instant when the command was given. What once united them would be shattered by something hidden inside their very minds. At first, it seemed harmless, even wise, a simple behavioral safeguard, a safety measure placed in every soldier to prevent uncontrolled aggression. On paper, it was nothing more than a line in a report, another layer of security for an army bred for obedience. But beneath that calm, official language lived something darker, colder, and far more deliberate. This wasn't about protection. It was about creation, the creation of the perfect weapon, built not to serve, but to destroy. Darth Sidious, disguised behind the gentle voice of Chancellor Palpatine, had spent years, decades, carefully weaving this deception. The clone army was not a mere military force. It was a seed of destruction planted deep within the heart of the Republic. Every soldier carried within him a secret, a silent betrayal wrapped in the illusion of safety. That chip wasn't designed to make the clones angry or disloyal. No, it was crafted to wait, hidden and patient, until the moment came when all masks would fall away. Its purpose was simple. Its intent, absolute, to wipe out the Jedi Order. The brilliance of it was cruel. The chip didn't make the clones hate their Jedi generals. That would have been too visible, too easy to notice. Instead, it slept quietly within their minds, unseen and unfeeling. When activated, it erased everything that made each soldier human. Every memory, every friendship, every ounce of trust and love was drowned beneath one unstoppable command. It didn't twist them into monsters. It made them believe they were doing what was right. That was Sidious's true genius. When the order was given, the clones didn't see their Jedi as friends anymore. In their minds, the Jedi became enemies, traitors to the Republic, threats to peace and order. The soldiers who once protected them now turned their weapons on them, not out of hate, but out of conviction. They believed they were saving the galaxy. And so, with cold precision, the perfect soldiers became the perfect executioners. No hesitation, no warning, no chance for escape. The Jedi never saw it coming. How could they? These were their allies, their brothers in battle, the men who had stood by them through fire and war. They trusted them completely, even when the Force whispered danger. But the danger was inside the very minds of those they trusted most. The betrayal came not from enemies across the stars, but from the hearts of those who had once sworn to protect them. The most terrifying part was how complete the control truly was. The clones didn't become mindless puppets. They still thought, still planned, still moved with the discipline and precision of the soldiers they had always been. Their minds weren't erased, only redirected. Every skill, every tactic they had mastered was now turned against the Jedi. The chip turned their strength, their loyalty, their very humanity into weapons. Millions of soldiers spread across thousands of worlds, all carrying this secret inside them. When the command came, there was no hesitation, no confusion, only action. The Jedi would fall not because they were weak, but because their faith was used against them. Each strike, each shot, each betrayal was delivered with surgical accuracy, carried out by the very hands that had once lifted them to safety. This was Darth Sidious's masterpiece. The Clone Wars were never just about ending the Separatists. That was the illusion. Every victory, every handshake, every act of courage between Jedi and clone, all of it was part of the setup. Every shared moment only tightened the trap, making the final act of betrayal complete and devastating. The true horror of the chip's purpose lay in how simple it was. No grand ritual, no complex code, just silence, patience, and perfect timing. Hidden behind the sterile words of behavioral modification, it waited. And when the command finally came, it did not hesitate. It awakened, cold and merciless, and turned the Republic's finest soldiers into instruments of annihilation. And in that single moment, the defenders of peace became the bringers of death. The trigger. 3 words. That was all it took to shatter the Jedi Order, to bring an entire generation of warriors to their knees. Execute Order 66. Short, clean, and final. But behind that simple command was a system so intricate, so hauntingly precise, it felt almost alive. This was no ordinary command. It was a key. A key built to awaken millions of silent machines buried inside living minds. Across the stars, inside the brains of every clone trooper, tiny chips waited in perfect stillness, coded with one purpose: to listen, to obey, to kill. These chips were not triggered by just anyone. They were designed with a level of control that bordered on divine. Only the voice of supreme power could reach them, and that voice belonged to one man. The signal didn't just need authority, it needed something more. A pattern woven deep into Palpatine's very voice. A code shaped by his biology itself. A living key for a living weapon. When those 3 words left his lips, they didn't just travel through sound. They carried energy, meaning, and purpose. Like lightning racing through a storm, the signal tore across the galaxy at the speed of thought. From Coruscant to the farthest rim, millions of soldiers heard it, and in that same breath, every chip came alive. There was no pause, no confusion, no mercy. The brilliance behind the mechanism was terrifying. The chips were programmed to recognize not only the words, but the specific frequency of Palpatine's voice and the encrypted codes hidden within it. You couldn't record it, you couldn't fake it. The chips could sense imitation, detect false signals, and shut down anything less than the true source. It was not just a command, it was perfection disguised as obedience. And when it happened all at once. A tidal wave of neural fire burst across the minds of millions. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't partial, it was absolute. One heartbeat, they were brothers in arms, sharing rations, laughing with the Jedi who had led them through years of wars of war. The next, their eyes went cold, their movements sharpened. The warmth of humanity vanished, the switch flipped. And in that instant, the entire Republic turned on its protectors. Palpatine's genius was not in the creation of the command itself, but in the patience behind it. The trap had been laid years before a single word was spoken. Every chip had been tested, refined, made invisible. They survived battle after battle, explosion after explosion, undamaged, unnoticed, waiting. Only one man could wake them. Only one voice could open that lock. It was a system so flawless that even the Jedi, with all their wisdom, never saw it coming. The true horror wasn't just in the betrayal, it was in the precision. There was no sign, no warning, no spark of hesitation. The soldiers didn't argue, didn't question, didn't blink. The transformation was as instant as death itself. 1 second, a clone might be smiling across a campfire at the general who had saved his life. The next, he'd raise his blaster, eyes blank, movements perfect, and fire without a thought. There was no time to resist, no chance to speak, no space for doubt. If there had been even a heartbeat of delay, one fraction of hesitation, the plan might have failed, but there was none. The design made sure of it. The moment those coded words hit the chips, the fate of the Jedi was sealed. It was beautiful in a way. Terrible, perfect beauty. A single voice carried through the airwaves, commanding millions to turn as one. No confusion. No split loyalties, just unity through control. And when it was done, when the echoes of that command reached the edges of the stars, the silence that followed was deafening. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. In the golden light of Coruscant, inside an office that towered above the city's endless spires, Chancellor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, leaned forward, calm, certain, and with a faint, knowing smile, spoke the words that would forever change the fate of the stars. Execute Order 66. The death sentence for thousands of Jedi swept across the stars like a shadow, swallowing the light. This wasn't the spark of a sudden assault. It was the final act of a plan set in motion generations before, the moment the trigger was pulled on the galaxy's most coordinated assassination. The timing was perfect. The Jedi were spread thin across countless worlds, leading clone armies in what they believed were the final days of the Clone Wars. They were weary, their strength chipped away by years of endless battle. Most of all, they were at ease, surrounded by soldiers they trusted completely. Men who had fought and bled beside them, men they called brothers. That trust would become their blind spot. When the signal came, it raced through the holonet like a storm of light, flashing from the shining core worlds to the lonely edges of the outer rim. Millions of clone troopers received the same simple command at the same instant. One heartbeat, the galaxy turned as it always had. The next, the sound of blaster fire echoed from one end of the stars to the other. Countless soldiers raised their rifles, turned them on the Jedi they once followed, and pulled the trigger. In less than an hour, the order that had guarded peace for 1,000 generations was gone. 99% of the Jedi wiped from existence in barely 60 minutes. Think of that. An ancient brotherhood of protectors and teachers, destroyed faster than the time it takes to watch a single holofilm. It was not a battle, it was a purge. Precise, merciless, unimaginably fast. Picture it. On Megiddo, Master Ki-Adi-Mundi charged forward across a crystal bridge when his own commander, Bakara, and the Galactic Marines turned their rifles on him. On Felucia, Aayla Secura was struck down mid-stride by Commander Bly and the soldiers of the 327th Star Corps, the same men who had followed her through years of hardship. On Cato Neimoidia, Plo Koon's fighter was blasted out of the sky by his own squadron, his starship plunging into the city below. Each death was personal, each betrayal intimate. The executions came not in battle, but in moments of stillness. While the Jedi planned new strategies, tended the wounded, or shared quiet meals with their troops, there were no grand duels, no heroic last stands, just sudden, brutal betrayal delivered at point-blank range. The precision was terrifying. Communications were silenced, escape routes sealed. Any Jedi who reached out for help only drew the killers closer. Those who tried to contact the temple found the channels dead. Some managed to send distress calls, not knowing they were only marking themselves for death. The hunters had become the hunted, and by the time the Jedi realized the truth, it was already too late. Even the Force, that living current that had always guided and warned them, gave no sign. How could it? The danger came from those the Jedi trusted most, soldiers whose loyalty had been absolute, whose presence in the Force had always felt steady and safe. The betrayal was invisible until the moment it struck. One breath they were allies, the next they were executioners. The clones moved with terrifying knowledge. Years of fighting beside the Jedi had taught them everything, how their generals thought, fought, and reacted. They predicted every move, countered every defense. This was not chaos, it was precision. The perfect inside job. Those who survived the first wave found themselves trapped in a galaxy that no longer recognized them. Every Republic base, every starship, every friendly face was suddenly a threat. The systems they had defended were now turned against them. Their own war machine had become the weapon of their extinction. And while the Jedi fell one by one across distant worlds, the heart of their order faced its darkest hour. The Jedi Temple, majestic, ancient, and radiant, standing as a beacon of wisdom and hope for millennia, was about to fall. And leading the attack was the one they once called their greatest hope. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, now reborn as Darth Vader, strode toward its gates. At his side marched the 501st Legion, his most trusted warriors. Veterans of endless battles. Heroes of the Republic. On this night, they became something else. This would not be a battle, it would be an extermination. Imagine it. The sacred halls where younglings once trained, where laughter echoed under sunlit towers, now filled with the cold rhythm of marching boots. The 501st moved through those corridors with flawless discipline, their familiar blue markings glowing in the dim light. They had walked these halls as protectors. Tonight, they returned as destroyers. Every entrance, every path, every defense, known by heart. Communications were cut, exits sealed, teams divided and sent through the temple in perfect synchronization. It wasn't chaos or rage, it was cold, measured slaughter. The clones advanced like a living machine, step by step, room by room, cutting down everything in their path. But the deepest wound came not from the fall of masters or knights. It came from what happened to the youngest, the younglings. Children from across the stars gathered for their promise, for their connection to the Force. They had grown up seeing clone troopers as guardians, even friends. Some ran toward them for safety when the shooting began. They never understood. Security recordings would later capture the horror. The blue glow of sabers flickering against blaster fire, the shouts, the screams, the silence that followed. The Temple's archives, holding thousands of years of Jedi knowledge, were not just destroyed. They were taken, piece by piece, locked away for a darker purpose. Palpatine's hunger for power reached beyond the throne. What he truly wanted was the wisdom buried within the ancient Jedi holocrons and texts. The knowledge of 1,000 generations, teachings, secrets, and philosophies was to be his alone. What could not be stolen was burned, erased, or smashed to dust. In a single night, centuries of truth vanished. The great databanks were wiped clean. The luminous holocrons, once glowing with the light of the Force, were torn from their resting places. Every trace of the Jedi's memory was meant to be forgotten forever. Inside the temple, chaos reigned. The air itself seemed to tremble as blaster fire echoed through its sacred halls. Masters and knights fought desperately to protect the young, their blue and green blades clashing against the unrelenting storm of red fire. But the enemy came with precision, numbers, and the element of surprise. Temple guards fell where they stood, cut down beside the gates they had sworn to protect. Medical droids were destroyed mid-treatment, their tools still glowing. In the younglings' training rooms, where laughter and lessons once filled the air, tiny practice sabers lay scattered on the floor beside bodies far too small for the horror around them. The temple's architecture, designed over millennia to embody peace, had become a trap. The grand corridors that once carried the gentle hum of meditation now roared with screams and explosions. The tall ceilings that had once lifted hearts toward the light now left no cover, no safety from the soldiers who knew every corner, every stair, every secret passage. Those who had built it to inspire wisdom now saw it turned into a crucible of death, and at the center of it all was Anakin Skywalker. The holo recordings would later reveal the unimaginable. His hood drawn, his eyes burning a sickly yellow, his blue lightsaber cutting through the smoke and cries of the innocent. The weapon that had once stood for justice now served the darkness. The man who was believed to bring balance to the Force instead brought its greatest wound. His presence was cold, merciless, unstoppable. The 501st Legion moved through the temple with frightening efficiency. Every chamber, every sanctuary, every archive was cleared. Not a single corner escaped their sweep. The clone troopers who had once saluted the Jedi with respect now moved with mechanical precision, turning their loyalty into a weapon. Their knowledge of the temple's structure, once a sign of trust, became the map to the Jedi's destruction. Even the secret tunnels known only to the Council were discovered, breached, and silenced. By dawn, the smoke rose high above Coruscant, a black scar against the golden skyline. The temple still stood, but everything that gave it life was gone. Bodies of masters and Padawans alike lay motionless, the marble floors soaked in silence. The once glorious archives stood hollow, their shelves bare as tombs. The tragedy was not contained to one world. The true horror of Order 66 was its reach. From the gleaming towers of Coruscant to the farthest edges of the Outer Rim, the same command rippled outward, a single order that turned an entire galaxy against its protectors. Across thousands of battlefronts from Utapau to Felucia, the betrayal struck in perfect rhythm. On Utapau, Obi-Wan Kenobi led his troops against General Grievous, unaware that his own commander would soon target him. On Kashyyyk, Yoda fought shoulder to shoulder with the Wookiees, his senses tightening as he felt the shift in the Force. On Maigito, Ki-Adi-Mundi pressed forward through glittering ice canyons, only to be surrounded by the very soldiers he had led into battle. On Felucia, Aayla Secura walked beneath alien trees glowing with spores, her trusted men just steps behind her, until they raised their rifles. The same story repeated itself again and again across 1,000 skies. A message received, a command executed, a friendship erased. In a single heartbeat, faith was turned into fire. Clone commanders who had laughed, fought, and bled beside their Jedi generals for years became their executioners. Commander Cody, who only moments before had held Obi-Wan's lightsaber for safekeeping, gave the order to fire upon him. Commander Bly, who had fought alongside Aayla Secura through countless campaigns, cut her down without hesitation. These were not strangers. They were comrades, friends, brothers in arms. But betrayal did not stop on the ground. Above the planets, among the stars, the slaughter continued. Jedi starfighters that once danced through the void in elegant formation became targets in the crosshairs of their own squadrons. Imagine the moment, a Jedi pilot trusting his wingman to guard his flank, only to see the glow of laser fire turning toward him. Master Plo Koon, one of the finest pilots the Order had ever known, was shot from the sky by the very men he had trained. His ship erupted into flame over Cato Neimoidia, another light extinguished in the darkness. And throughout the galaxy, silence grew. Every Jedi, wherever they were, reached for the same instinct, to call home, to warn the Temple, to seek guidance. But every channel was dead. The emergency frequencies filled with static. The private codes were jammed. Communications, once guarded with sacred secrecy, had been compromised long before the order was given. The brilliance of the plan was chilling. It isolated every Jedi, cutting them off from one another, ensuring that no cry for help could ever be answered. Some still tried. A Jedi Master, sensing dread through the Force, ran to her ship's console, frantically inputting codes, trying to reach Coruscant. Only the hiss of static replied. As she turned to change frequencies, her own clone commander stepped into the room, weapon raised, eyes cold and empty. That scene repeated itself on countless ships, on countless worlds. Every attempt to reach another Jedi only revealed their position, bringing death ever closer. And it did not end with the military. On worlds where Jedi served as peacekeepers or advisors, local forces were ordered to assist in the purge. Republic officers who once bowed in respect now drew their weapons. Civilian networks were warned that harboring a Jedi was treason punishable by death. The entire Republic, its armies, its fleets, its bureaucracy became one vast machine of extermination. Even the stars turned hostile. The hyperspace routes once used freely by Jedi became traps. Republic cruisers, once sanctuaries between missions, became cages from which no escape was possible. Those who fled the first strike found themselves hunted through the void, every jump leading them closer to another ambush. The galaxy itself had become a maze of death. There were thousands of Jedi scattered across 10,000 systems, each commanding legions of soldiers. When the order came, millions of troopers turned at once, their minds unified by the same command, their loyalty redirected by a single code. No Jedi, no matter how powerful or distant, was spared. It was more than the destruction of an order, it was the extinction of a way of life. For those who survived the first moments, the pain ran deeper than the wounds of battle. It was the pain of betrayal, of realizing that the hands that pulled the trigger were the same ones that had once offered help, laughter, and trust. Years of friendship and shared victory ended in fire and disbelief. For the Jedi, the final moments were filled not only with loss, but with heartbreak too heavy for words. The Force itself seemed to cry out as the bonds of brotherhood shattered, broken by plasma fire and betrayal. In the chaos of the stars, loyalty burned away in an instant. The betrayal was swift, merciless, and brilliantly cruel. Jedi pilots already locked in deadly combat with separatist fighters suddenly found their allies turning against them. Republic cruisers, once symbols of unity and order, swung their mighty guns toward their own protectors. Turbo lasers flashed like storms of betrayal, tearing through Jedi starfighters with no warning, no mercy. Navigation systems were scrambled, hyperspace routes sealed off, and the exits that once meant freedom became deadly traps. Every strategy, every formation, every battle plan the Jedi had helped to create was now being used to destroy them. Out of the thousands of Jedi scattered across the galaxy, only a small broken handful survived that first terrible wave of Order 66. These were not just lucky ones who escaped by chance. They were warriors, thinkers, survivors who forged their own salvation with courage, instinct, and the Force itself as their guide. Each one carried not only their life, but the memory, the spirit, and the burden of an entire order that had fallen. Their stories became legend, whispered in the shadows of the galaxy they once protected. Among them stood Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. His survival on Utapau became the kind of tale soldiers tell around dying campfires, almost too impossible to believe. One moment, he led the 212th Attack Battalion into victory, standing tall after defeating General Grievous. The next, the very men who had fought at his side for years turned their weapons on him. Commander Cody, his trusted ally, his friend, gave the order. A blast thundered through the air, throwing Kenobi and his Varactyl mount into a deep sinkhole, the world above fading into smoke and fire. What looked like certain death became the key to his survival. The same canyons and hollow depths that had made Utapau a nightmare for battle now became his path to freedom. Using every instinct and every lesson from decades of Jedi discipline, Kenobi moved through underwater tunnels and shadowed caves, evading clone patrols that hunted him like prey. He emerged battered but alive, seizing Grievous's own starfighter and vanishing into the sky. The hunter had become the hunted, yet Obi-Wan turned the Force itself into his shield. Where others fell, he adapted, endured, and disappeared into legend. And then there was Master Yoda, far away on Kashyyyk. The ancient Jedi, small in size but vast in power, felt the betrayal before it struck. The Force trembled around him, a heartbeat of warning, and he moved as only a being of 9 centuries could. In one smooth motion, his green blade ignited, striking down the troopers who aimed to shoot him in the back. This was not just skill. It was the weight of centuries, the calm of mastery honed through countless lifetimes. With the help of his Wookiee allies, among them Chewbacca, Yoda moved through the thick jungles and chaos of the battlefield. Clone patrols swept every corner, but they never found him. Each search ended in silence. The most powerful Jedi in the galaxy simply vanished, leaving only whispers in his wake. But perhaps the most heartbreaking story belonged to the young Padawan Caleb Dume, the boy who would later become Kanan Jarrus. His story spoke for the lost generation, the young ones who survived but carried scars that never healed. When the command came, Caleb was beside his master, Depa Billaba, fighting with the same clone troopers they had trusted like family. He watched in horror as those brothers turned their blasters upon her. Her final word to him, "Run," became his curse and his salvation. He fled, heartbreaking, world collapsing behind him. His survival was born of his master's sacrifice and his own desperate will to live. Caleb Dume died that day in spirit. From his ashes rose Kanan Jarrus, a man hiding behind a new name, living among smugglers, mechanics, and outlaws. He buried his lightsaber, tore off his robes, and buried everything that once defined him. But the guilt followed him. The Force whispered to him in dreams he tried to forget. His story showed that sometimes survival is not freedom. It is a lifetime spent carrying the weight of what was lost. Others, too, found their own paths through the storm. Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, a maverick even in peace, vanished so completely that even the Empire's shadow network could not trace him. Jocasta Nu, keeper of the ancient Jedi archives, escaped the temple's destruction only to risk her life later trying to preserve what knowledge she could. Some lived for the future, some died for the past, all paid a price that could never be counted. Their survival was both triumph and tragedy. Some, like Taron Malicos, lived only to fall into darkness, their minds breaking under years of isolation. Others, like Sera Junda, chose silence, cutting themselves off from the Force rather than risk exposure. For many, survival was not a victory, but a burden too heavy to bear. The ways they endured were as varied as their souls. Obi-Wan and Yoda chose isolation, hiding among the stars as hermits and ghosts. Kanan Jarrus blended into the crowd, living as a simple man while the galaxy burned. Some took risks, saving others in secret, trying to protect what little light remained. Their stories endure not because they lived, but because they kept hope alive. Obi-Wan became the quiet guardian of Luke Skywalker, holding on to a future he might never see. Yoda, alone in exile, became even more deeply one with the Force, his spirit still guiding those who would come after. Kanan Jarrus, no longer a child but a man forged by pain, became a teacher himself, proof that even in the darkest age, the flame of the Jedi could still burn. But while these survivors faded into shadow, their former comrades, the clones who once fought beside them were left facing. To understand the real heartbreak of Order 66, we have to step into the minds of the clones themselves. These were not cold machines built to obey. They were men, each one shaped by years of war, by friendship, by trust. They laughed, they joked, they bled beside their Jedi generals. They weren't just soldiers, they were brothers. And when the order came, something deep inside them screamed to resist, even as their bodies moved against their will. They were conscious, awake, and trapped within themselves, forced to witness what they were doing, but powerless to stop it. Think of Commander Cody. One moment, he's standing in the dust of battle, handing Obi-Wan Kenobi his lightsaber, sharing an easy moment that only warriors who've survived side by side can share. "Here's your weapon, sir. Try not to lose it again." A lighthearted tease, a brother's joke. Then, in the next breath, a hologram flickers to life. 3 words are spoken, and everything changes. The same man who just laughed now gives the order to fire on his friend. The ground shakes with explosions meant to kill the very person he'd trusted with his life. Inside, something cracks. The mind knows it's wrong, but the body obeys. The agony of that split between loyalty and forced betrayal is almost beyond words. Captain Rex felt that pain more than most. His bond with Ahsoka Tano went far beyond rank or orders. They were family forged in fire, survivors of countless battles. When the command echoed through his helmet, Rex fought it with everything he had. His hands trembled. Tears streamed down his face. "Find Fives," he managed to say, his voice breaking under the weight of the chip fighting to control him. That single moment, him struggling to protect her even as the programming took over, shows the pure human tragedy buried inside the armor. But not everyone could resist. Commander Gray, loyal and disciplined, executed his order without hesitation. He fired on his own Jedi General, Depa Billaba, and her Padawan, Caleb Doom. Days later, as the fog of battle cleared and reality began to set in, the truth of his actions crushed him. The loyalty he had once taken pride in became a weapon turned inward. Unable to live with the memory, he chose death over the unbearable guilt. He crashed his ship deliberately, ending his torment in the only way he could control. Each clone carried the aftermath differently. Commander Fox followed orders without pause, his mind seemingly consumed entirely by the programming. Commander Wolfie, on the other hand, carried his scars forever. Nightmares, silence, regret that never left him. The chip hadn't only stolen their free will, it had rewritten their reality. The Jedi, who had once been their trusted leaders, suddenly appeared as enemies, traitors, threats to the Republic they had sworn to protect. Their world flipped upside down in an instant. Then there were the soldiers of the 501st Legion, the men who marched beside Anakin Skywalker through battle after battle, who'd seen his courage, his compassion, his devotion to the Order. When the time came, they followed him into the Jedi Temple, unaware that their hero had become Darth Vader. Together, they executed everyone inside, masters, knights, even younglings. In that moment, the chip shielded them from emotion. But later, for those whose awareness began to return, the horror of what they had done became an unbearable weight. For Clone Force 99, the Bad Batch, the tragedy unfolded differently. Their mutations made them resistant to the control that enslaved their brothers. Hunter, Tech, and Wrecker stood frozen in disbelief, watching in horror as the clones they'd fought beside turned their weapons on the Jedi. They weren't blind to what was happening. They saw it all, and that made it even worse. They could feel the world collapsing, powerless to stop the tide, forced to watch their brothers become executioners against their own will. For most clones, Order 66 created a terrible fracture in the mind. Their bodies obeyed, but their hearts screamed in silence. It was as if they were locked behind their own eyes, trapped in a cage inside their own minds. They saw their hands pull the trigger. They heard their voices give the orders. They watched their friends fall. And they could do nothing. After the war, those who survived were changed forever. Some clung to the new empire, burying their guilt under blind obedience, serving harder to drown the voices in their heads. Others, like Rex, found a way to remove the chip and finally faced the truth of what had been stolen from them. For him, the memories never stopped echoing. Guilt became his shadow, and redemption his only path forward. Yet the darkest fate belonged to those who never broke free, who embraced the programming, not just in that moment, but for life. They became the Empire's foundation, the first stormtroopers, trainers, and hunters of their own kind. What remained of their humanity had been overwritten, their beliefs rewritten, until the Jedi were nothing but ghosts of treason in their minds. For the few who stayed aware during that moment, the horror was like drowning in your own consciousness. They could feel the weight of the blaster in their hands, hear their own voices shouting commands that weren't truly theirs. The bonds that had once held brothers in arms together through years of battle, the trust forged in fire and shared struggle, still lingered deep inside them, buried beneath layers of cold, unyielding programming known as planetary reaction. Order 66 didn't just echo across war zones or military posts. It tore through city streets, across cafes, homes, and markets, shaking the lives of countless ordinary beings. Imagine sitting in a quiet Coruscant cafe, sipping a drink, when suddenly the holonet flashes with breaking news and the Jedi Temple, once a beacon of peace, erupts into towering flames. Picture standing in the city of Megiddo, watching the same clone troopers who had defended your world only moments earlier turn their weapons on the Jedi beside them. In one heartbeat, everything people believed about good and evil flipped upside down. Across the galaxy, local governments were faced with the same impossible choice: submit to the newborn empire or be crushed beneath its might. On Naboo, a planet long celebrated for its ideals of peace and democracy, the Royal Council could only watch as clone troopers surrounded the palace, their armor gleaming under the city lights. The message was not open for debate. Aid in the capture of any Jedi who might seek refuge or face occupation. Even Queen Ayana, remembered for her compassion and unwavering ethics, was forced to publicly denounce the Jedi while secretly sheltering those who survived. On more militarized worlds like Huat, the change came without hesitation. The mighty shipyards that had built fleets for the Republic simply repainted their insignias. The same forges, the same workers, now built for the Empire. The transition was almost seamless. The local officials read the wind and sided quickly with power, eager to prove their loyalty. Clone troopers now marched beside local enforcers, searching every hangar, factory, and underground passage for any Jedi who might be hiding in the shadows of the great industrial spires. But not all worlds submitted so quietly. Take Montala. When the order came, their king stood firm, refusing to betray Jedi Master Sui Choi, the very one who had defended their people not long before. The Empire's answer was swift and merciless. The 101st Legion descended from orbit, burning through resistance with precise mechanical brutality. The battle that followed became one of the first grim displays of Imperial might, a message written in fire for any world daring to defy. Among civilians, the reaction was tangled in confusion and fear. On worlds where the Jedi had long been protectors, healers, and mediators, people struggled to believe the Empire's claims that they were traitors. In the shadows, quiet rebellions began to take shape. Underground networks formed, made up of ordinary citizens, farmers, engineers, merchants. People willing to risk everything to help a fleeing Jedi. On Rio, the Twi'lek people who had fought side by side with Jedi during the Clone Wars were horrified when the soldiers turned their guns on their generals. Some Twi'leks tried to intervene, believing there must have been a mistake. The retaliation was devastating. Whole villages were punished, burned to ash for offering food or shelter. Yet even then, new resistance cells emerged in secret tunnels and old mines, determined to help whoever they could. Meanwhile, the propaganda machine roared to life. Within hours, the holonet blazed with official footage, clips edited to show Jedi attacking clones instead of defending themselves. Loyal citizens were paraded before cameras to tell stories of supposed Jedi betrayal and corruption. The truth was rewritten as it happened, shaping a new version of history before anyone could question it. For many, believing the lie was easier than facing the nightmare truth. On Coruscant, the chaos was impossible to hide. People living near the Jedi Temple saw everything: the flashes of blaster fire, the smoke twisting into the night sky. The official word was that the Jedi had attempted to overthrow the Senate, and the clone troopers had bravely defended democracy. Yet whispers spread through the Undercity. Stories of Padawans gunned down while trying to escape, of citizens who tried to help and vanished without a trace. Even the galaxy's great business guilds fell in line almost overnight. The Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, and countless others who had once courted the Jedi's favor now turned their praise toward the Empire. Their broadcasts changed in a single day, from praising Jedi heroism to condemning Jedi treachery. For them, credits outweighed conscience, and the promise of order was a song they couldn't resist. Still, some worlds found ways to resist in silence. On Alderaan, Bail Organa maintained the appearance of loyalty while quietly using his diplomatic reach to smuggle Jedi to safety. Similar acts of quiet defiance spread across Chandrila and Corellia, where reports of Jedi sightings were delayed or quietly misplaced. Some officers simply arrived too late when the Empire demanded their presence. Others followed orders with frightening enthusiasm, eager to prove their devotion to the new rule. This widening divide between those who obeyed and those who dared to resist was more than political. It carved deep scars into the soul of the galaxy, shaping the course of its future. Worlds that embraced the Empire's crusade against the Jedi were showered with contracts, credits, and favor. Those who hesitated, those who held on to compassion, found themselves under watch, their skies filled with patrol ships, their people living under the shadow of fear. And through it all, the galaxy learned what it meant to survive in a new age of silence. Across the galaxy, schools and academies changed almost overnight. New rules and lessons were forced into every classroom. Within days, the curriculum was rewritten to erase the past. Textbooks were edited, lessons replaced, and teachers ordered to remove anything that praised the Jedi Order. Children who had once dreamed of becoming Jedi, who had played with toy lightsabers and imagined flying through the stars as heroes of peace, were now taught something entirely different. They were told that the Jedi were corrupt, dangerous, and that their fall had been necessary to save the galaxy. The stories that once inspired hope were now rewritten as tales of betrayal. Religious institutions faced the same suffocating pressure. Temples and spiritual centers that had ever spoken of the Force or carried any memory of the Jedi were forced to publicly condemn them. Those who refused risked being closed, their leaders imprisoned, their teachings destroyed. The Church of the Force was driven underground. Its followers hid their faith behind quiet words and coded gestures, pretending loyalty to the Empire while secretly keeping their beliefs alive in the shadows. The galaxy after Order 66 did not simply change. It became something else entirely. The shift from the Republic to the Empire wasn't just a transfer of power, it was the death of an era. It was like watching light fade from a star until nothing remained but darkness. Every corner of society felt the shockwave, from the shining halls of government to the silent depths of forgotten worlds. Imagine Coruscant in those first few days. Smoke still rising from the once sacred Jedi Temple, now covered with the sharp black banners of the Empire. Clone troopers stood at every corner, their armor freshly painted in cold, unyielding white. They walked the same streets they once defended, but now their presence carried fear, not safety. Inside the Senate chamber, the echoes of democracy faded beneath thunderous applause as Palpatine declared himself Emperor. The very guardians of freedom cheered for their own chains. The transformation was not chaos, it was order, cold and deliberate. Within hours, the Republic's symbols were torn down and replaced with the Imperial crest. The old emblems, once carved into marble and metal, were chiseled off walls, replaced with hard geometric patterns that spoke of dominance and control. This was not decoration, it was a declaration. The Republic was gone, and it was never coming back. But the darkest change of all was the erasure of the Jedi themselves. One day they were honored as protectors of peace, their history stretching back 1,000 generations. The next, they were criminals, accused of treason and deceit. Their names were wiped from archives and star charts. Temples became military bases. The holocrons that held their teachings were seized and destroyed. Even saying the word Jedi in public could bring suspicion, arrest, or worse. The clones who had once fought beside them faced their own transformation. They became stormtroopers, symbols of control instead of courage. Their bright armor, once a promise of protection, became a warning. Their training changed too. They were no longer taught to defend, but to dominate. The sense of brotherhood and individuality they had known under the Jedi was replaced by obedience and fear. Each soldier became a faceless part of a vast machine. For ordinary citizens, the psychological toll was immense. Generations had grown up believing in the Jedi as legends of honor and hope. Now, they were told those same heroes had been monsters in disguise. Parents who had once spoken proudly of Jedi Knights now whispered warnings to their children. Those born with sensitivity to the Force, once celebrated and sent for training, were now hidden away. Families taught their children to suppress their gifts, to stay silent, to survive. The economic wounds deepened as well. The Clone Wars had already drained resources across countless systems, but the Empire's hunger was far worse. Worlds that had once been peaceful centers of learning or faith were now occupied. Their minds, factories, and people were redirected toward the Empire's endless war machine. The old debates about democracy and freedom seemed childish compared to the cold efficiency of Imperial rule. In the criminal underworld, a new kind of fortune was born. Bounty hunters who had once worked alongside Jedi now hunted them for pay. The Empire placed staggering bounties on any surviving Jedi, turning the shadows of the galaxy into hunting grounds. Even relics, lightsabers, robes, fragments of holocrons became valuable contraband. Traders whispered of secret buyers and hidden collections, each artifact carrying both profit and danger. The dark times became more than a name. They were a way of life. Systems that had once enjoyed freedom under the Republic now bent under Imperial law. The holonet, once a tool for connection and truth, became a weapon of control. Every broadcast, every message was filtered, twisted, rewritten. Even private conversations could be monitored for signs of loyalty to the old ways. The clones' shift into stormtroopers mirrored the larger transformation of the entire galaxy. Their precision gave way to intimidation. Their individuality was erased in favor of conformity. Their armor, redesigned to look colder and more severe, reflected the Empire's new creed: fear over respect, obedience over honor. Education was rebuilt from the ground up. Every school became a tool for indoctrination. Students learned that the Jedi had been power-hungry zealots, that they had tried to destroy the Republic. Lessons about ancient wars were rewritten to make the Empire the savior of order and peace. Children memorized propaganda as if it were truth, their young minds shaped to worship authority and distrust freedom. Technology and research followed the same path. Building a lightsaber became a crime punishable by death. Kyber crystals, once sacred and mysterious, were now restricted to Imperial laboratories. The Empire began collecting and destroying all Jedi holocrons, replacing centuries of wisdom with Imperial propaganda. Even medical studies related to the Force were banned or locked behind military clearance. Knowledge itself became dangerous. Philosophical and spiritual groups were not spared. Any faith, teaching, or belief that even faintly echoed the Jedi way was targeted. Temples were raided, leaders disappeared. To speak of the Force as anything more than a superstition was to invite suspicion. In public, people said the words of the Empire. In private, they whispered to the memory of what once was. And through it all, the galaxy adjusted. Quietly, painfully, inevitably. Survival became more than a skill. It became a way of being in the days after Order 66. A galaxy that had once welcomed Jedi as guardians of peace and hope now turned its gaze away, some in fear, others in cold indifference, and many in greed. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every friendly face could be a trap. This was no longer just a fight to live. It was a fight to vanish, to exist in a world designed to seek you out and destroy you. Imagine the weight of that life. Jedi, beings who had devoted themselves to the Force, trained to trust their instincts and to stand against injustice, now had to distrust those instincts at every turn. Using the Force became a danger, leaving a signal that could draw hunters straight to them. Acts of compassion, the very principles that had guided their training, could betray them. The Empire's response to the survivors was precise, cold, and merciless. They didn't simply send soldiers, they created hunters, a new class of predator, the Inquisitorius. These were former Jedi, twisted, broken, remade into tools of pursuit, knowing the Jedi way as intimately as any victim could. Who better to chase Jedi than those who once walked in their shoes? These were not just dark side users. They were weapons honed against those they once called allies. The knowledge of every technique, every instinct, every hidden strategy became a trap. But the Inquisitors were only part of the Empire's machinery. They knew fear and greed could do what armies could not. Bounties were posted, enormous sums that could set a hunter for life. Every port, cantina, and marketplace became a place of danger. The galaxy's web of hunters, skilled in tracking, turned their expertise to Jedi alone. Success brought not just reward, but prestige, reputation, and imperial favor. For the hunted, survival demanded sacrifice. Every mark of the Jedi, the lightsaber, the robes, the bearing of a knight, had to be cast away. Confidence became caution, grace became camouflage. They learned to slouch, to shuffle, to blend with crowds that had long forgotten them. Masters of deception, they became ghosts in a galaxy of shadows. Even in this darkness, small sparks of hope emerged. Some refused to bow to the Empire. Secret networks of sympathizers formed, operating with codes so subtle that even their own members often questioned their meaning. A certain pattern of crates in a warehouse, a phrase dropped in conversation, a set of lights in a docking bay, all could signal safety or danger. Every successful rescue was balanced on a knife's edge. A single capture could tear the network apart. Those caught aiding Jedi weren't merely punished, they were displayed as warnings, their fates public and brutal. Yet still, some risked everything. It was a bitter irony. The Jedi, defenders of law and justice for millennia, now depended on criminals, smugglers, and outcasts for survival. These allies rarely cared for the Force. They acted out of hatred for the Empire or loyalty to the kindness they had once received from Jedi. Survival strategies were as varied as the people who used them. Some hid in plain sight, taking jobs so ordinary they would be overlooked. Others vanished into the unknown region, seeking places beyond Imperial reach. A few hid in the heart of Imperial territory, gambling that audacity could shield them. The most insidious weapon of all was psychological. The Empire did not just seek to kill, they sought to erase the Jedi entirely. History was rewritten. The Great Temple on Coruscant became the Imperial Palace, its archives locked or destroyed. To speak of Jedi with respect became dangerous. An entire generation grew up believing Jedi were traitors, not guardians. For the survivors, every day was a fight against extinction, not just of life, but of memory. Some hid holocrons and sacred texts, preserving knowledge for a future they might never see. Others trained apprentices in secret, knowing that discovery meant death for both teacher and student. The true horror of Order 66 was not just the death it dealt, but the silence it forced, the fear it spread, and the shadows it cast across an entire galaxy. Even as the hunted moved through crowded streets and empty wastelands carrying nothing but their wits and hope, the weight of every loss and the memory of every fallen comrade pressed on them like the darkest night imaginable. Clone Cases does not announce itself in sweeping tales or grand battles, but in the quiet, heartbreaking stories of individuals. It shows in the private betrayals that stretched across the galaxy, each clone's life etched with a tragedy, all its own. Every clone faced a struggle between the orders embedded deep within them and the person they had become, a conflict that would mark one of the darkest chapters in galactic history. Take Commander Cody, perhaps the most haunting example of the chip's ruthless influence. Here was a clone who had fought side by side with Obi-Wan Kenobi through the fiercest moments of the Clone Wars. Their bond had grown in the fires of countless skirmishes, strengthened through shared victories, shared losses, a friendship that defied the usual lines between general and commander. Yet when Order 66 triggered, every trace of Cody's individuality vanished in an instant. In the heat of the Battle of Utapau, the man who had been a trusted companion became a perfect instrument of betrayal. One moment, he was handing Kenobi his lightsaber, a gesture of loyalty. The next, he was calmly directing artillery to strike at the very friend he had fought to protect. There was no struggle, no hesitation. The chip's programming simply took over, transforming one of the Republic's finest commanders into the executor of his general's death. Cody's story exposes the chip's terrifying precision, proving that even the most capable and independent clones could be turned against everything they once held dear. Then there is Captain Rex, whose experience adds another layer to this grim narrative. Rex's awareness of the chip's true purpose before Order 66 gave him a fragile chance at resistance. Warned by the sacrifices of Clone Fives, who had uncovered the truth at the cost of his life, Rex carried a secret knowledge that shaped a single, extraordinary moment in the history of the Jedi Purge. Inside him raged a battle the designers of the chips had never expected. The programming tried to seize control, but Rex fought back with every ounce of his being. He managed to warn Ahsoka Tano, fighting not only against an enemy, but against the impulses of his own body. Those fleeting seconds of defiance, bought with unimaginable mental strain, determined life or death for his commander. It was more than physical defiance. It was a clash of identity against imposed control, a struggle of selfhood against machine-like obedience. Rex proved that under the right conditions, even the most brutal programming could be resisted, if only for moments that mattered most. And then there is Clone Force 99, the so-called Bad Batch. These clones, shaped by genetic quirks that gave them unmatched skills and abilities, reveal yet another side of the chip's reach. Their mutations, the very traits that made them exceptional in combat, also made them less predictable to the chip's influence. Their imperfections became survival, allowing them to preserve free will when most of their brothers were reduced to instruments of execution. Hunter, Tech, Wrecker, and Echo responded in different ways to the same command, their unique genetics creating cracks in the chip's control. It was not superior training or knowledge that saved them, but biology, a simple twist of DNA. Yet even within this remarkable group, the chip's threat remained. Crosshair, despite his differences, fell under its sway, a chilling reminder that even divergence could not guarantee immunity. His fate highlights the haunting variability of the chip, the uncertainty of how it interacted with clone genetics across the galaxy. Throughout the Republic, there were rare anomalies, clones whose chips failed or faltered. Some hesitated, some seemed momentarily aware, trapped in minds at war with their own bodies. Others felt the programming falter and were left in horrified awareness of what they had done. These exceptions were not enough to derail the operation, yet they offered a window into the machine-like efficiency of the system and its imperfections. For those who survived with memory intact, the aftermath was unbearable. Some took their own lives, unable to face the deeds they had been forced to commit. Others vanished into the far reaches of the galaxy, seeking obscurity, fleeing from the shadow of their own histories. History is a record of events, but these individual stories whisper of the cover-up written by the victors. But in the case of Order 66, it wasn't merely written. It was crafted with ruthless precision, carefully twisted, and spread across the galaxy like a shadow over every world. The Empire's greatest victory wasn't just in carrying out Order 66, it was in convincing everyone it had to happen. Imagine the vastness of that lie. This wasn't about erasing a few records or changing a few dates in dusty archives. This was about remaking the story of the galaxy itself, turning heroes into villains and painting its greatest protectors as traitors. The Empire didn't just kill the Jedi, they killed the memory of them. The story began before the bodies of the fallen could even cool. When Palpatine declared the rise of the Empire, he delivered more than a speech. He delivered a story designed to shape every mind. The Jedi, he said, had plotted against the Republic, trying to seize power and overthrow the government. The timing couldn't have been better. The galaxy, exhausted from endless wars, was desperate for stability. People needed to believe someone had rescued them from chaos, and the Emperor provided that story, complete with carefully edited recordings showing Jedi attacking him, exactly as he wanted them to appear. The genius of the Empire wasn't just in the story itself, but in how it explained the clones' role. Millions of soldiers turning on their generals at once. How could anyone believe it? The Empire didn't explain it. They celebrated it. The clones were heroes, loyal defenders of the Republic in its darkest hour. Their sudden attack on the Jedi wasn't shown as the result of hidden programming. It was proof of their steadfast dedication. Every record, every holovid, every report was altered or rewritten. The Jedi Temple was no longer a place of learning and light. It became the Imperial Palace, a monument not to what had been lost, but to what had been saved. Evidence that contradicted the official story was destroyed or hidden deep in secret archives few could ever reach. The propaganda machine worked like clockwork. Children born after Order 66 learned a story entirely different from what had actually happened. Across the galaxy, Jedi were painted as power-hungry zealots who had betrayed the Republic. The Clone Wars became not a Sith plot, but the start of Jedi ambition, with Count Dooku shown not as a Sith, but as a disillusioned Jedi whose rebellion foretold the treachery to come. Even the story of the clones themselves was rewritten. Their sudden betrayal became a tale of loyalty and duty. Their precision and coordination across countless systems was celebrated as proof of perfect training and devotion. The truth that inhibitor chips had forced their actions, the hidden purpose behind their creation, was buried under layers of lies. Those who questioned the story found themselves silenced or discredited. Memory itself was under attack. Survivors of Order 66 began doubting what they had seen, as the Empire's version became the only reality. Anyone brave enough to speak out was dismissed as a conspirator, a sympathizer, a dangerous voice in a galaxy that no longer remembered the truth. The cover-up reached into art, literature, even architecture. Hollywood supported the official story. Artists who painted the Jedi sympathetically were censored. The Temple, that seat of wisdom, was remade into a symbol of power, its stones seemingly forgetting the lessons they had once held. For decades, the lie held fast. Generations grew up knowing only what the Empire allowed. Truth became legend, then myth, and eventually faded almost completely. Those who remembered the real story of Order 66 grew old or died, taking their memories with them. The Empire's tale became the only one people knew. The real tragedy wasn't only in the execution of Order 66, it was in how completely the truth had been hidden. Millions who had once trusted the Jedi were made to believe they had been deceived from the start. The clones, victims themselves, were remembered as loyal heroes, saviors of the Republic. The aftermath of Order 66 cast a shadow across the galaxy, one that would stretch far longer than the war itself, shaping generations and bending reality into the story the Empire wanted everyone to believe. Long-term effects. A darkness spread across the galaxy that would linger for generations, shaping lives in ways no one could have imagined. This wasn't only the closing of an age, it was the birth of an era filled with fear, where even a whisper of Force sensitivity could seal a person's fate. Look at the stories we have of those who survived. Young Cestus, forced to bury his gifts, scraping by on Bra, eyes always scanning for danger, or Gru, hidden away for decades, his life a secret that could destroy anyone who tried to protect him. These were not rare accidents. They were the face of survival through silence, hiding the very essence of oneself. The fear was real. The Inquisitorius hunted Force-sensitive children with merciless precision, turning what should have been moments of wonder into days and nights of terror. Parents who might have celebrated their children's talents instead taught them to hide, to deny their own nature. The Path, an underground network, risked everything to ferry these children to safety. Their courage, a small, flickering light in a galaxy growing darker. The legacy of the Jedi was crushed along with its people. Objects once revered for learning and growth, lightsabers, holocrons, became prized treasures for those willing to traffic in the forbidden. Discovery meant death, so these artifacts disappeared into secret vaults and black market trades. Clone veterans of Order 66 carried horrors of their own. Engineered to age twice as fast, they had half the normal human time to face the memories of the atrocities they had been forced to commit. Imagine the weight of that guilt pressing on a body that decays faster than it should, each line and ache a reminder of what had been done under the chip's control. Few, like Captain Rex, found freedom from that programming, helping expose the cruel truth behind the clone's design. Most lived and died carrying burdens not of their making, their lifespans stolen while their memories refused to fade. The Empire redefined the Jedi as enemies, turning centuries of guardians into traitors overnight. This was not mere propaganda, it was enforced reality. Sympathy for the Jedi became dangerous. Knowledge, even basic, of their ways went underground. By the time the Battle of Yavin arrived, many believed the Jedi were legends, their existence doubted. The Force itself dismissed as superstition despite proof scattered throughout history. Cultural shifts rippled through the galaxy. Temples, once centers of learning and philosophy, were replaced, emptied, stripped of all their treasures. On Elam, where younglings once gathered kyber crystals to craft their first lightsabers, the Empire transformed the sacred world into a massive star-killer base. The networks that supported the Jedi, medical workers, farmers, educators, were hunted down and obliterated. Destroying the Jedi meant destroying their entire web of support. The younglings who survived the Purge faced a galaxy turned against them. The Inquisitors, trained former Jedi, used their knowledge to hunt down children with deadly skill. The Grand Inquisitor, once a protector of temples, became a hunter, turning training meant to nurture into instruments of death. Force sensitivity, once a gift, became a curse. Medical facilities stopped testing infants, knowing that discovery meant marking them for death. This was not policy. It was a deliberate act of erasure, a methodical silencing of what had once been celebrated. Survival has a strange, dark twist when you look at how the Empire took one of the galaxy's worst acts and turned it into its grandest celebration. Empire Day, the day marking both the deaths of countless Jedi and Palpatine's rise to the New Order, became more than a date on a calendar. It became the cornerstone of the Empire's legend, a story told to glorify horror, a masterpiece of manipulation, turning slaughter into spectacle. The official Imperial records and broadcasts kept every detail, carefully crafted, polished, and repeated. In his first Empire Day speech, Palpatine framed Order 66 not as the climax of a Sith plot, but as a heroic rescue of civilization itself. Edited footage from the Jedi Temple, showing Mace Windu and other Jedi attempting to arrest the Chancellor, became the Empire's proof, broadcast across star systems as undeniable evidence of Jedi treachery. Within the Imperial Academy, Order 66 was not a tragedy, but a model of military precision. Cadets studied the flawless timing, the coordination of millions of clones, carrying out their orders across thousands of worlds. Manuals highlighted loyalty above all else, showing how each trooper, regardless of personal bonds with their Jedi generals, obeyed without hesitation. At the Imperial Military Academy on K, Order 66 was central to training. Every tactical decision, every moment of coordination, every precaution to prevent warnings from spreading was taught as a blueprint of discipline and perfection. The emotional betrayal, the personal bonds broken, were stripped away, leaving only cold efficiency to admire, to learn from, to emulate. The true impact of Order 66 reaches far beyond the immediate loss of life. It reshaped entire generations' understanding of trust, power, and the Force. Even after the Empire fell, its lessons echoed through galactic politics. The New Republic, born from the Empire's ashes, was built to prevent such betrayal again. The Resistance later followed a decentralized command model, mindful of how a central command had enabled such catastrophic obedience. Luke Skywalker's attempts to rebuild the Jedi Order carried the weight of Order 66. His new temple was informed by the failures of the past, using recovered holocrons and texts to teach not just the ways of the Force, but the history of its near destruction. Surviving clone troopers bore a brutal legacy. Accelerated aging and abandonment meant they faced infirmity far earlier than normal, confined to Imperial retirement facilities long before their natural lifespan ended. Captain Rex, freed from his inhibitor chip, became a living reminder of both the horror and the possibility of redemption. Force-sensitive individuals were shaped in silence, learning to hide their gifts. A generation taught suppression as survival. The physical legacy of Order 66 is visible everywhere. The Great Temple on Coruscant, now the Imperial Palace, stands as a symbol of conquest. On Jeddah, sacred halls were destroyed, Ilum's Kyber crystal caves were mined and later became Star Killer Base. Jedi archives, painstakingly collected over millennia, were destroyed or hidden, filtered into an official Imperial history that would influence future generations. Survivors like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda faced exile not just to survive, but to reflect, questioning how the Jedi had missed the threat growing within the Republic. Their recovered journals reveal a constant struggle, watching over the next generation, holding hope while carrying the weight of failure. Planetary governments also bore the scars. Worlds once home to Jedi enclaves were forced to erase all evidence of their past or face ruthless Imperial retaliation. Many of these planets paid the ultimate price simply for preserving tradition. Order 66 was more than an event. It drew a line between eras. Before it, the Jedi had been guardians of peace for thousands of generations. After it, the memory of their existence became dangerous, whispered in secrecy. Military loyalty, spiritual tradition, and political authority were all forever altered. Betrayal had been too complete, too efficient, too devastating to be forgotten. Even decades later, long after the Empire fell and the Republic rose anew, the ripples of Order 66 continued to shape every corner of the galaxy. From the private tragedies of individual Jedi and clones to the grand sweep of galactic politics, from the destruction of ancient temples to the building of new governments, the mark left by Order 66 is permanent and undeniable. It is woven into the memory of the galaxy, a cautionary story of power and obedience, of betrayal and survival. Every generation that rises after Order 66 carries its echoes, its lessons, its warnings, its scars. In the end, Order 66 is not just history. It is the shadow that stretches across time, a reminder of what happens when trust is broken, when fear is used as a weapon, and when the cost of control is measured in lives lost. The story of Order 66 ends not with a single moment, but with the lasting imprint it leaves on every world, every heart, and every memory across the stars.